Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today we have with us Mel from Watching the World 777. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Mel. How are
Thank you for
you?
having me. Hello. I'm
Yes.
okay. Thank you for having me.
So, if you don't know Mel, he is a courtroom trial, um, as far as I'm concerned, expert and correspondent. He goes around the country covering high profile cases and trials. And so today we have him discussing with us the case of Carmelo Anthony. And we're going to do a day by day breakdown of the case, the lawyers, the testimony, the closing arguments, and obviously the verdict and what's next for Carmelo. So, Mel, before we jump into Carmelo's case, why don't you tell people a little bit about how you came up with Watching the World and why you think it is important that the public have access to these sort of trials?
Well, I came up watching the world because I cover a lot of cases and news from around the world. In fact, in September, I'm going to be covering Chris Brown in London. So that's around the world. But I've covered so many high profile cases, namely President Trump, where he received 34 felonies, Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, Sean Diddy Combs, Harvey Weinstein, the Alexander brothers. And I'm covering currently Luigi Mangione, his state trial that's coming up in September, and also at the top of the year, his federal trial. So a lot of trials moving through.
Great, great. So today we are obviously jumping into Carmelo Anthony's trial. Carmelo, it's not a celebrity like a Chris Brown or a Diddy, but his case did resound around the world as an important case that everyone wanted to watch because it involved a black athlete killing a white athlete um, in Texas, of all places, and also they were teenagers. I mean, these were teenagers. This was an incident between teenagers, and from the beginning it seems like race was a driving factor with this case, even down to the jury pool, which we'll get to in a second. That, as far as we're concerned, was not it was not a reflection of his peers, which constitutionally you have the right to that. And so let's start off with the opening statement. So we have this jury pool, as I mentioned. There are no black persons on in this jury, right? I believe it was all Asian, white, and maybe Hispanic.
Yes, you had five white women, five white males. You had two Middle Eastern women, one Middle Eastern man, one Hispanic woman, and then you had four Asian women. That was the consistency of the 12 jurors and six alternates.
Okay. And so that was already concerning. A lot of people were like, okay, well, how's he going to get a fair shot? And there's not a single black person on this jury. But this was the jury that was um, selected. And so we have opening statements from prosecution and then the defense. Can you tell us more about those?
Okay, so basically, they started off talking about, they painted a picture that he had an open knife sitting there just waiting for something to happen. It was not about race and it was not about self defense, but basically, he had these deadly and dangerous actions. And they showed basically how he came there that day probably to do something that was hideous. In fact, they went on to describe how he ran off and threw the knife down. And they painted a picture that he fled so that he could try to get out of the arena. But ultimately, we saw something different as the video started to play. So they painted the picture of Austin Metcalf, and they gave us a timeline that at 9:54, the twins arrived, the Metcalf twins. At 9:56, which was 2 minutes later, Carmelo Anthony arrives. He sits down right behind Hunter. And then at 10 o'clock and 58 and
I'm
48
just going to
seconds,
interrupt you for just a second. So when you
right,
say they, this is obviously the prosecution's opening argument, not the defense. And
correct.
Hunter, tell us who Hunter is, because interesting enough, they made this case all about Carmelo and Austin, which we'll get to a little bit later. Why it's important that a part of his appeal definitely emphasized Hunter. But who is Hunter?
Hunter is the twin brother, identical, of Austin Metcalf, the individual that lost his life on April the 2nd, 2025.
Okay, and so Hunter is entering with Austin into the tent first, and according to this opening statement, and later, obviously, the video, but the opening statement paints this timeline of them entering the tent first, and then you said 2 minutes later, Carmelo Anthony, and then continue on with what the opening statement describes as to what happened and why they felt like the jury should find this not a self-defense case.
Okay, so at 10 o'clock and 48 seconds, that's when the fight starts. Austin goes over, he attacks Carmelo. At 10 o'clock and 53 seconds, they say the suspect ran, and they showed us on the video basically how Carmelo ran out the back of the tent. So based on the timeline structure, that's when they described how he tried to flee. He was trying to get rid of evidence, but ultimately he ran on the track to a coach.
Right, right. So we have the opening statements of the prosecution. How did the defense lay out their opening statements in defense of Carmelo?
Well, defense basically started off and they showed that, listen, you heard what the prosecution said and basically how they described the narrative of him trying to get away. But Mike Howard pretty much helped us to understand that when you watch the actual video, you're going to see something quite different. You're going to see Carmelo run on the field and not out the exit, where he clearly had an option to do so. They also called what the prosecution called a knife. They made it very clear that it was a multi-purpose tool. And I believe it has 6 different features, and the knife happened to be one of them. That was the defense point of reasoning in regards to setting the stage for the case, and that he basically was defending himself because they explained that Carmelo was 5'7", 130 pounds. Austin Metcalf was 6'1", 220 pounds. So there was a big difference, and that you would see later that Austin attacks him and Carmelo defends himself.
Got it. Got it. So the defense definitely lays out for Carmelo. They set the stage of how this was definitely self-defense. There was no premeditation. It sounds like the prosecutors out the gate wanted to paint this picture that he came to the field ready to fight. He came to the field ready to injure someone, even if not to kill, but for him to already be carrying this multi-purpose, tool that included a knife, right? Included a blade, that for him to be carrying in the first place, they tried to paint that as a part of his intention to come to assault someone. Whereas the defense painted it as, well, this is a legal thing you can carry, this multi-purpose tool. So it wasn't anything devious, right, about carrying this tool. You can carry this tool legally, probably in any state, right? Because it's not just like a straight up knife. It's a multi-purpose tool that just includes a blade. And so it seems like the defense from the beginning tried to knock that out, that, hey, yes, he was already carrying this tool, but it's no indication of premeditation. So it sounds like the defense tried to do a pretty good job of knocking that down. Okay.
Right. And the defense also explained how he had epilepsy and he often had seizures. And they also set the stage that, listen, under these tents, you would have roughly 20 kids. It would act as sort of like a locker room. It was okay for kids to actually go under other people's tents. So they dispelled a lot of the rumors that were floating around in regards to that as well.
Okay. And so moving from the opening statements, you then have the prosecution that gets to obviously lay out their case first. How many witnesses did the prosecution call? And can you just quickly tell us what each of those witnesses testified to and how it supported the prosecution's claims?
I believe in all they had about 21 witnesses. They started off with the video expert, and he came in and set the stage that basically, listen, this is how the high definition videos work. It's basically a lot of pictures moving fast. This is how the compilation works. So a lot of that came out, just the logistics of how this would be laid out. But then also he explained that at this event they had a 4K camera. They had multiple cameras up. One was filming across the stadium. One is filming the west side. The other one is filming the east. And so when you look at the camera just as it sits, it's very clear. You could see birds and rain, all sorts of things. But when you zoom it in, it becomes pixelated because you're filming all the way across the field. So he set the stage for that, and then they proceeded to show us this video.
So, in addition to the video expert, because you said it was 21, I don't think anybody probably realized that there were 21 people they called. So, in addition to the video expert, which was one of 21 people they called, who else out of the 21 stuck out in terms of witnesses that really provided, you feel like, great testimony for the prosecution? In addition to the video expert, who else stood out to you from the prosecution's witnesses?
Right. I sat through about, let's say, 13 kids coming through, and then there were coaches and police officers. But who stood out to me the most was Eddie. In fact, when he took the stand, the prosecution said, "Listen, Eddie, do you realize that you're like the man of the hour? Because all of these kids that came in, most of them have mentioned you in one way or another." And Eddie said, "Yes." And also, they said Eddie would be the nexus between Austin and Carmelo because he were friends to both of them.
Well, I was going to say, again, tell our audience who Eddie is, because a lot of us, you have to remember, we weren't in the trial, and there's no coverage really that really breaks down who the witnesses are, per se, and how it all, comes into play in terms of how it supported the prosecution's argument. So can you tell us who Eddie is and what he testified to?
Okay, so all of the kids came in and said how Eddie was basically the friend of Carmelo. It came out in court that Eddie was basically on the same team, obviously, as the Metcalf twins, and they probably had known each other for quite some time. But on the flip side, he was friends, although he tried to downplay it when asked about it by the defense, and especially by the prosecution. He tried to downplay how much he knew Carmelo, but Toby Shook, the defense attorney, did a good job at questioning Eddie. And he went back to 2023 and he says, "Is it true that Carmelo was dating your cousin? Her name starts with a V." And he says, "Yes." So then Toby Shook started to put pictures that we've seen in the exhibits that they were together at family events. They show you that Carmelo is with Eddie's grandmother. They show you that, in fact, Toby Shook asked Eddie, "Was there a time when you and Carmelo were in your bedroom playing video games and Carmelo was playing the guitar?" And Eddie's like, "No, I don't recall that." And then they put it on the screen and you see the photo of them playing Eddie's playing the video game on the bed, Carmelo's playing the guitar. And so it started going on back to back, I'd say 7 or 8 photos. And then the prosecution stood up and says, "Listen, basically, we've had enough of that. Can they get to their point?" And then the judge is like, "Yeah, I was about to say the same thing," something like that. So then Toby Shook, the defense. He basically says, "Okay, I only have one more to show you." And so then he proceeded to show it to the prosecutor. They called for voir dire, and he took, I think it's Worski. He took whatever the last exhibit was, and he showed it to Eddie, and he kind of objected to it. But anyway, he was able to show it. So basically, that gives you an idea. But then Toby Shook had brought up to Eddie, "Is it true that 10 days before Austin lost his life, that you were actually hanging out with Carmelo at the previous track meet?" And Eddie says, "Yeah, we were together at the concession stand." And so the defense attorney says, "But you were also sitting with him on the field." And Eddie says, "Well, if I was on the field, I was warming up." And then he put the picture where you see in the exhibits where they're sitting together on the field, and everybody pretty much in the audience, you could see them looking around like, wow, Eddie and Carmelo were quite the friends.
So I just want to back up a little bit. Something I didn't do before you start describing the opening statements and some of the witnesses for the prosecution. For us to better understand this case, you have to understand what is being charged, right? Because when you have witnesses and you have evidence, right, it has to either go against the charges or it has to go with the charges. And so you're describing a lot about Eddie, but I don't think our audience is going to connect why it is so important that Eddie is lying about him being really friends with Carmelo, because at the end of the day, this is a high profile child. Maybe he just wants to distance himself. So I want to connect it more to the charges, why this testimony is important. So the charges here, it's murder, right? So it's a murder case. And in murder cases, you have to prove some form of premeditation. And so the defense is saying on behalf of Carmelo that this was not, while this was a killing, and Carmelo admits to doing the killing, he's never not admitted to not doing the killing. So this is not what this trial is about. A lot of the public opinion was about, he killed that kid. Oh, you know, people have to keep hands to themselves. That's not what this is about. We already know that there was a fight between the boys, a weapon was used, and that weapon then killed one of the twins, which was Austin, right? So that's undisputed. The trial was about, was this A, premeditated? And if it was not premeditated, should he have been then charged with something lesser, like manslaughter? And then number two, did he have the right to self-defense? Because if you can actually show someone has the right to self-defense, then they completely get off. There is no lesser charge. If you had the right to defend yourself, you are then found not guilty of murder because you had an excuse, a legal defensible excuse to murder. So with that being said, this whole trial went back and forth between the prosecution and the defense to present evidence and witnesses to either support that either it was premeditated or it wasn't. And then number two, stand your ground, which is a self-defense law, which is not in all states, but it is in most southern states, including Texas, that says that if you reasonably fear for your life, you have the right to, number one, not retreat. You have no duty to retreat. You have no duty to run away. You can actually use deadly force to defend yourself. And the reason why this law is important is because it makes us think about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman in Florida, where the same law was used to get Zimmerman off for murder. Okay. So when we apply the same rule to a Black boy in Texas, who, again, maybe someone in our audience wouldn't have feared for their life. Maybe I wouldn't have feared for my life. Maybe you wouldn't have feared for your life, but Carmelo feared for his life. Under that law, it says if you reasonably, not anybody else, if you reasonably fear for your life, you have the legal right to use deadly force to defend yourself. And so with that being said, the evidence and the witnesses in this case, I feel like did not, at least on the defense side, and what we're getting ready to get to the defense side, I don't think it laid that out enough. I'm not saying they didn't touch on it at all, but I feel like there should have been an emphasis, number one, of why this was not premeditated. And we did talk about how they said that the multi-purpose tool he was carrying was not unusual, and it just so happened to have a blade. And that is, you know, what obviously went into Austin's chest when he hit him with it. That's not unusual to carry the tool. That's not an indication of premeditation. But what I didn't hear was, I feel like I didn't hear enough, and maybe you'll get into it. I didn't hear enough of evidence and testimony to support why Carmelo did not have the right to use the force he used. Under self-defense, there is this caveat that it still has to be in proportion. So even deadly force, it should be in proportion as to the context of what's happening. So in this case, you have more than one person on Carmelo, and he's responding with attacking with this tool. is that proportion? I know the prosecution gets into that. And so just backing up to what you just talked about in terms of witnesses that stood out, I understand how a videotape can support whether there's premeditation or, it was the response proportional, right? A video can definitely either support or go against that argument. But how did, and I'm sorry, what was the student's name again?
Eddie.
Eddie. How did Eddie's testimony and all the other students' testimony, because like you said, it was 21 witnesses. Eddie and the students were a big bulk of that 21. How did that testimony support whether this was something premeditated or not? Were they saying because Eddie was friends with both of them, there's no way that this could have been premeditated? I guess I'm just trying to connect the dots of why is it important that Eddie was both of their friends?
So they tried to paint the picture, and when I say they, I'm talking about the compilation of all of the students that came in to testify for the prosecution. They tried to paint this picture that Carmelo came in the tent. They said he dapped up Eddie, and then he sat down, and basically he didn't say much of anything. So now you're painting him as though he came there for some motive that it was most people couldn't determine why, right? So they all kind of said that. And even when it came down to the actual fight, they all said that Austin just lightly, most of them were saying he lightly pushed Carmelo on the shoulder. But then we had key witnesses coming in and they described something different, more than a push, more like a football move. There was a guy that came in, his name was Hudson. I believe at the time he was 16 years of age. But he said that Austin used a lineman's drill. That's where you pick up, you really get up under a guy. And then the guy before him by the name of Jay, he mentioned how Austin grabbed Carmelo by his hoodie and he was trying to pull him up or pick him up. And so under cross-examination, they asked him some questions and he said it's almost like he's trying to bring him up out of his seat. So they paint a picture that he could have been in fear because he's being, picked up, and that could be dangerous on metal bleachers.
So just to clarify, the students, which were the bulk of these 21 witnesses of the prosecution side, did they also testify for the defense, or this was just cross-examination where it came out that some of them were describing more rough play than some of the other students? Like, who were the witnesses for? Were they only the prosecution's witnesses, and then the defense just cross-examined them to dive deeper into how much force was used? Were they only the prosecution's witnesses? I just want to be clear on that.
They were prosecution's witnesses. They had the right to call them back, but they just basically had cross-examination. And they actually said this under the prosecution's watch when they were being questioned by the prosecution, said, listen, he did a lineman's drill.
So interesting. Even though they testified for the prosecution, it seems like some of their argument actually supported what Carmelo said, that, hey, it was more than one person that was touching me. It wasn't just like a one-on-one fight. I had multiple people, more than, when I say multiple, at least more than one person touching me to some extent, whether it's a lineman's, move, as you mentioned, or somebody picking him up. But it appears that at least some of the students described something more than just a light brush of a touch.
Right. From Austin.
Right.
They all.
And then beyond the students. So, okay. So now I understand how that fits in. They're saying that here you have someone that knows them both that's making it seem like maybe Carmelo didn't like Austin in advance. So that's motivation. Like if what you're saying is true, it sounds like the prosecution was trying to paint that Carmelo didn't care for Austin anyway. And so that's a part of why he would have motivation to maybe not necessarily kill him, but to get in a fight with him, that he didn't like him. So it looks like they tried to use I'm sorry, what was Eddie's testimony to paint that Carmelo in advance that did not like Austin. Would you say that's correct?
I think collectively they kind of steered most of the witnesses to wanting to say that, like, he came and sat down as a man on a mission.
Mm,
you
I
know,
see.
being
I see.
quiet, not talking to anyone. But then all the students would come in and say, yeah, they were talking about the weather. So some of them were actually, and everybody had their own spot in the tent, and that dictated a lot of what was said. Like the girls were sitting at the bottom. Some say some of the girls were in the middle, but each person that was included, they all had a different angle, and they spoke about it from that way.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So we have the video expert, we have the students with the star witness of the students being Eddie, since he knew both the victim and Carmelo. And then you said there were some police officers. Were there any teachers that testified or
Yes,
any staff members
the
that
first,
testified for the prosecution?
yeah, the one that stands out the most was Coach Starr. He was the star witness as far as from a coach perspective. I'm sorry, because he ran the tent that Austin and also Hunter for their school. And so he testified that day that Austin and Hunter, they were the ones that put together the tent. They talked about how Austin was actually kicked off the team, but the day of the event, you see in the exhibits, you see where he's telling him, listen, I need you guys to be a leader. In other words, step your game up. The prosecution helped to quantify what he really meant by that. But he says that the reason, usually there's a coach under the tent, but he said that day he had to go get a crock pot out of the car on his way back. That's when he heard that Austin had been stabbed. And basically, he dropped what he had and went to investigate, see what was happening. Um, the prosecution, what's so unique about his testimony is that when they asked, hey, can you recognize the guy who did this that day? The coach Star, who was a black man, he says, yeah, that's him over there. And today he's clean cut because Carmelo had cut off whatever hairstyle he had. But then they put the picture of him. And he was like, but this is what he looked like that day. And it kind of gave you this feeling like your hairstyle made you look more like a criminal. And I'll never forget that moment.
Mm, interesting, interesting. And I just want to back up. You mentioned that Austin was not supposed to run that day. He was like off the team for that day. Did they say why? Was it due to behavior issues? Because I think one of the running parallel stories outside of just the fight that day was that Austin and his twin were allegedly menaces. They were bullies. So even if this hadn't happened, right, that both of the twins had been suspended before, and now you're telling me Austin wasn't even supposed to run that day. So was it due to
Well,
behavior issues?
Well, not necessarily that day. I can't speak on that day, but he was removed from the team. He did get a text message that day saying, listen, I need you guys to be a leader. So I think that was like re-engaging him back on the team for the day, although they
So,
did not
so they
make it
never.
clear.
So to be clear, they never. Neither the prosecution or the defense dug into why
No.
he wasn't on the list in the first. Like no one dug deep to say why he was removed in the first place. No one talked about that in depth.
Well, yeah, he did testify that Austin basically they were going to the buses and doing other things when they should be in the tent. And so that's ultimately when you look at the exhibit, the coach actually explains because he tells his assistant, listen, these guys are not living up. This is the issue. And they were removed, but as of the day of, because he sent Austin that text, you kind of get the feeling that he's re-engaging them and saying, listen, but I need you to become a leader. You don't hear him say in the text, I need you guys to run or do this or that. So it's not totally clear what all of this
What he
meant.
meant. But what's interesting is if he had may have not sent that text, Austin may have not thought to even attend that day. So it's interesting how one
Right.
moment, right? One text that originally he was not supposed to be a part of the team that day, how that text kind of changed the trajectory of him actually even being physically present that day. So anyway, I mean, I ask these questions just because I know a part of what his appeals team is going to do, which we'll close the episode with. Carmelo does have an appeals team. They're going to review every detail, every question, every comment, every what I'm doing now. They're going to do that for every piece of evidence and every witness. They're going to ask, well, why wasn't this asked, and why wasn't this followed up? Because it's amazing how one detail can make all the difference in terms of the result of a case and the evidence in the case and how it supports obviously your argument or if it doesn't support your argument. Okay, so before we move to the defense, was there anybody else on the prosecution side um, in terms of like witness testimony that you felt like stood out, or were those the key ones, the ones that you just mentioned?
Yeah, there was another guy by the name of Tion. He gave a great testimony. I'm just stating he's black just so you can have some context. But he actually said that when they started arguing, Carmelo had the backpack on his shoulder and he brought it around. He put the backpack on his lap and he put his hand into the backpack, right? He said that he told Austin, do not mess with Carmelo because he felt like he did have a knife. And under cross examination, they said, well, why did you feel that way? And he says he could just feel it in the air pretty much, right? But he said Austin responded this way. He says, well, I don't think he has a knife. This is Frisco. And he proceeded to do it anyway. So that was key
Interesting. And
testimony.
Tion was a student.
Yes, a black student.
Okay, so this was another student that of the students that testified. This was another student. Yeah, for you to just say I feel it in the air, I just felt like he had a knife. I think that's very strange testimony because could you feel like he had a gun? Like why specifically a knife? I almost feel like they know now that this tool had a blade, and so now they're almost. It just appears like I don't want to say they're rewriting history, but it's like you already know what the end result is, right? A blade was used to stab him. So now when you go back to your testimony, it's easy for you to be like, oh, yeah, I think he had some sort of weapon. I just had a feeling he had something. But why specifically a knife? There are all sorts of weapons, right, that you could particularly carry. So I don't think that's very believable that you just felt like someone had a knife. Again, unless maybe you saw something the previous day or a few minutes before, a few hours before, maybe you saw something in the bag. So you kind of had a feeling that it was still there. That's different. But to just say you had a feeling that someone had a knife, it's just a little too specific without context. So I do think that it's interesting that you mentioned that student mentioned that. Okay, before we move to the defense and then the closing arguments, outside of the video evidence, which I want you to start off with, what other pieces of evidence did the prosecution have? And you can
Um,
start with the video evidence, and then you can talk about any other key pieces of evidence that the prosecution had outside of the video that you thought was important to support their case that this was a premeditated murder, and not only was it premeditated, that he did not act in what they call the heat of passion. Right? This was something premeditated, and that essentially they don't believe self defense applies in this case because they felt like it was not proportionate to the
right.
context of what's happening. So tell us about first the video and then any other pieces of evidence the prosecution had do you think the audience should know about?
Okay, so when it comes to the video, they basically outline how they start off, they show you where Carmelo is coming in, and there's a west view, there's an east view. But ultimately, according to the timeline, you can see the video they put out. You see the twins walking in with all the boys. They walk into the tent, 9:54. They sit down, and you see Hunter sit down ultimately because 2 minutes later, you're going to see Carmelo walk into the tent from the left if you're viewing the video head on. And he sits right behind Hunter, just like what the testimony said, behind Hunter, but beside Eddie. Eddie is to his right. Okay. So then about 4 minutes go by before you see the fight. And the video gave context because now you understand once Carmelo came, you could probably hear them going back and forth if you were there under the tent, right? They were arguing about all these different things for 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. The fight begins. They basically point out in court because it is pixelated because they're showing you this video from across the stadium. They say, listen, you see Austin, he goes over to the right and he comes back to the left, right? So that's become very clear. Then they show
When you say
you,
he goes to the right, the left, in the sense he goes towards Carmelo and then away from Carmelo, what
and
is
then
right?
away. Yes. Okay. So in the video, when you're looking at it head on, Austin is to the left about central tent. You can see him go to the right. He does whatever move he does on Carmelo, he does it. Carmelo, according to the prosecution, he plunged the knife into his chest area. Okay. So then you can see it's just to the right, and then Austin bounced back to the left, and then immediately you see Carmelo run out of the back of the tent.
So when you're
And then
saying bouncing back, he had been hit at that point. That's why he fell back.
yes,
I just want to
yes,
be clear.
yes.
Okay. Okay. So that's why he moves back. Okay.
Right. Because
Mhm.
keep in mind, the entire time Carmelo was sitting down, he never stood up before this whole incident happened. Even when the plunging the knife into the chest, or this football move that people are describing, all of that, Carmelo is sitting down. So ultimately, in order for Austin to get a hold of his hoodie, you would imagine he has to lean in toward him, right? And the guy says he's trying to pick him up or whatever. Now, when you think about the facts of the case and what they laid out, um, Carmelo has this backpack in his lap, and if this was a knife, it's inside the bag. And within 5 seconds, he has to read that Austin is moving. By the time he pulls out the knife and holds it up, right, that's he's already on him, right? So you have two motions going. You have whatever Carmelo's doing. Also, you have Austin running his way, right?
So
So
it's
all of this
so
happens very
what you're
quickly.
describing is simultaneous. There's
Yes,
simultaneous of Austin coming towards Carmelo, and Carmelo again viewing him coming towards him and him reacting essentially at the same
in
time.
five
So it wasn't
seconds.
like right. So it's so to me, what you're describing actually supports that if you view someone coming towards you, whether it's a football move or not, but it's an aggressive move, even if you're not picking up a tool or a weapon or anything, you're probably in that moment as you see the person aggressively coming towards you, trying to pick up something to defend yourself because you're essentially also trying to brace yourself, right? It's just like in football when someone's running towards you, you're trying to brace yourself for the impact. So even if he didn't pick up a weapon, he at a minimum would have had to brace himself for the impact of what you're describing. There is a lot, as you know, misinformation that spreads. Misinformation always says spreads faster than actual information, especially on social media and online. But right now, the biggest thing that's being spread is that two things. One, that Carmelo was not just touched or roughed up by Austin, that it was also Hunter, and that there were other people that touched Carmelo. So I want you to tell me from what you can see from the video, because I know the second argument is that the video was just too blurry and perhaps it may have been edited. So that's the second thing that people are saying online. But let's start with the first thing. Even with the video being blurry, does it clearly show that more than one person touched Carmelo? Yes or no?
At face value, no.
Because you're saying because it's too blurry in the version
Right.
that they show, you're saying it's too blurry to see if more than one person touched him, but it's clear enough that you can at least see Austin touching Carmelo.
Right. And that's what they pointed out in court.
Okay. And again, this is unenhanced footage. This is just blurry footage. This is all the jury was able to make out. Okay. And then my second question is, you said that he sat the whole time. Did outside of running, right? Did Carmelo ever get up?
No. When he
So
got up
all this
once,
happened while sitting down. Every single thing from
yes,
even if someone touched him before, everything was done with him sitting down. And the video never shows him getting up until he ran away.
he was in a submissive position.
Interesting. Which again would support more of the defense's argument that if you're in a submissive position, you're more in a vulnerable position, right?
Yeah.
You're really in, at least in that moment before he took the knife and stabbed, you're really the victim because you're in a position where you could be harmed more because you're sitting. You're not standing where you could potentially get away and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So in the state of the video, which was very blurry, you're saying the only thing you could possibly clearly see is that for sure Austin touched him and Carmelo obviously reacted with the knife. Now,
Yes.
the second thing that's running wild on the internet is that they didn't show the whole tape or the tape is edited somehow. What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm assuming for timekeeping purposes, they're not going to show like from morning to evening, right? They had to cut out a certain section to show the jury. From what you could tell, does it appear that something is maybe missing in the video footage? Just from what you were able to see, does it appear that anything is missing?
In court, they told us they would give us 5 different angles, and that's what they did.
Okay.
But
Okay.
according to what they released, you see the entire timeline and you see when people came in, right? So based on that, I don't see any indication that someone tried to alter the video, at least from what I've gathered.
Okay. No, that's good to know because that's something,
Mhm.
again, that's kind of running on the internet. And I do think part of what the appeals team will do, so that the court and whoever needs to, I do think an enhanced version of the video so that, again, we can see more of these details, whether they support Carmelo's argument or not. I think it actually was an injustice that a more enhanced video was not provided to the jury because I do think it would have given to me support either from one side or the other, right? Um,
Right.
and the video is the video. So if you're not editing it, you're just blowing it up so that you can just really see what's happening. It's going to tell you the truth, whether it supports Carmelo or not. But it is interesting you saying that the 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 version that they saw in court was 5 different angles, but they were all blurry. And the only thing you can say, absolutely, someone could say, even from this blurry video, is that Austin was the provoker and Carmelo responded. And I find it interesting that the prosecution, as a part of their argument, says, no, he wasn't the provoker. Carmelo was the provoker. How can you make that argument when Carmelo was on the other side of the tent and didn't touch Austin first? That was something that came out in the trial that I thought was really strange. How did the prosecutors make the argument that Carmelo was the provoker when they showed this video footage that goes completely against that argument? Like, what did they have to support that he was the provoker?
Because you had individuals saying that there was, banter going back and forth. Eddie says that Carmelo basically kicked off and saying, "You guys suck ass." Now, keep in mind, they probably did this before. These guys were together. I can't say these guys, but at least Eddie and Carmelo were together 10 days before. And maybe it was a nice day and everybody was getting along, right? But because the coach had kicked him off the team, told them, listen, you guys need to be on top of your game. Now somebody comes in and make a light joke. If that was the first engagement, now, the prosecution is using that as to say he came in, and they didn't use this illustration, but this is what I gather from it, the way they laid out their case. If you watch the Discovery Channel and people do the duck hunting, they blow the horn and then the duck comes to them and they shoot it. That's what they were trying to say, that Carmelo set the stage for this by coming up and saying, hey, you guys are suck ass. Because in the video, they didn't even talk about the video. They didn't talk about Hunter that much from that angle where he's saying the boy walked up behind him and was talking terrible and all that, right? Okay. But at any rate, they're saying he started verbally, and then all of these boys, because a lot of them testified this boy was saying something and we told him to get out of here. It was white and black kids coming in saying, listen, we told him to get out. So that's how they're saying this is what triggered this whole motion. But we don't know what the exact first words were.
Right. Okay. So they're saying not so much a physical provoker,
Right.
but he was a provoker with his words. Got
Yes.
it. Got it. So we have the prosecution's opening statement, witnesses, evidence, with the key piece of evidence being the video saying that he already came in on a mission. This is their whole argument. He already came in a mission. He already came in to be disgruntled and not be nice to Austin. And when Austin asked him, like others, to leave, he used it as an excuse to, as far as they're concerned, unreasonably defend himself. Because I don't think they were making the argument that you couldn't defend yourself if somebody pushes you first. But they're saying it wasn't proportion. Like his response was not proportion. So if he had just pushed him and maybe he fell back and hit his head and hurt himself, okay, that would have been okay for self-defense. But what they're saying is him using what they're purely calling a knife. They're not even calling a multi-purpose tool. They're saying that it was not a proportioned self-defense. And so that's why that shouldn't be used, and that there was enough evidence of some version of premeditation to say this was murder and not manslaughter. Now, before I move on to if there were any other pieces of evidence for the defense that were
Yes.
key that stood out, did they ever state that or ever prove through testimony or evidence that Carmelo knew Austin? Like, had he hung around Austin, or was it just, okay, he knew Austin because he was just another player on a competing team and they, sometimes ran against each other? Did they ever talk about any sort of conversations, him hanging out with Austin? Was there any timeline prior to this day that Carmelo even really knew Austin to not like him? To already come in the tent to say you don't like someone and you want to already be aggressive and fighting with them, that tells me that you already don't like the person. So was there any evidence to support why Carmelo would not like Austin before this date?
No evidence of that at all.
Right.
No
so
evidence.
That kind of leads that kind of supports the defense's argument that this wasn't something that was premeditated, because he didn't really necessarily have a reason not to like this boy, to already come in on a mission. That is not supported if you can't show that he even really knew the guy prior. So, okay. So that answers my question. Okay. So outside of video evidence, was there any other key piece of evidence that the prosecution showed before we get to the defense witnesses and evidence?
Yes. They also called a coach by the name of Vincent Hooper, and he testified that basically, so there's several coaches, so I'm going to have to mix it together for the sake of time. Fine. So we had Tiffany, she came in after Hooper, but she says that in the video, when you see Carmelo run up and he runs down, he falls and he runs past the exit to get out. That's opposite to what the prosecution was saying. He runs around to try to get to a coach, and Tiffany says she stopped him with her hand because she had heard that this is the guy, this is the suspect. She stopped him, and he stopped. She handed Carmelo over to the big black coach. His name is Vincent Hooper. He's 6'2", 240 pounds. Vincent said that he put his arm around Carmelo. You can see it in the video. And they started walking probably down the field, centrally located, right? And he says that he got distracted for a minute. I think he went over to find out what happened, because his first words to Carmelo was like, "What did you do, son?" Carmelo says, "I told him not to put his hands on me," something like that, right? Vincent Hooper goes over. Carmelo doesn't run like what the prosecution was trying to paint this picture. He waits. Hooper comes back, and in the video, you can actually see his testimony come to life. He put his arm right back around Carmelo, and he says, "Son, if this young man dies, you ruin your life." Carmelo says he's not going to die, but then you see Carmelo jump up, and he starts crying. You could tell. In accordance to Hooper's testimony, they embrace. You can see it in the video. He puts his arm around Carmelo. Carmelo puts his left arm around him. And then you have a period in the video where now Carmelo's, so that gives you the remorse, right? And the defense didn't really draw that out. Why wouldn't you draw that out for your client? That
I was going to say, because there's, in addition to what you're saying, that piece of video footage, there's been some other footage now being released showing that not only is he saying he put his hands on me first, I told him not to do it. So he repeats that to the police officer in the footage that they recently released a few days ago, like the body cam footage. He said he repeats that again, but he also asks if he's okay. Does that sound like someone that doesn't have remorse? Does that sound like a murderer to you? Someone that is actually asking the person that physically attacked them first. He's asking, is he okay? Right. It just further supports that for you to say that he was a man on a mission. Even if he wasn't going to kill Austin, he was going to rough him up that day. That's just clearly not supported. And even the aftermath, like you said, the aftermath that the defense did not, for whatever reason, dive into, and maybe obviously this will happen on his appeal, that this was clearly someone that felt like they needed to defend themselves, whether he used a tool or not, that he felt like he needed to defend himself because the person was physically touching him first, and that it just unfortunately resulted in a murder. But this was not, even in the moment, it doesn't appear that, based on the aftermath comments on the police cam and what you're describing, he said to the coach, one of the coaches or the staff members, I don't think when he was even hitting him with that tool, he thought, oh, he's gonna die, or he wanted him to die. I think he just purely, again, wanted to get him off of him, right? I think he wanted to get him off. That was the goal. It just so happened to transpire into a death. But I just don't think there's any evidence in this case that supports that. Number one, he was on a mission to do anything, let alone a murder. And two, that even when he used the tool, even if you want to call it a straight up knife, if you don't want to use the knife, the proper word that it was a multi-purpose tool, even if you want to say, no, that's a straight up knife, it was a blade. Okay, fine. Even with him using that, I feel it just sounds like, based on what has been presented, that it definitely was purely to get him off of him. And I want to also just briefly go back to this blade. His defense says it's a multi-purpose tool. Prosecution says it's a knife. Either way, it's a blade.
3.5 inches.
3.5 inches. One of the things that I think both sides agree on in the evidence is that he only hit him once. Correct?
Right.
Is that correct? He only hit him once.
Yes.
So to me, when you argue, oh, it wasn't proportion for him to use this tool or knife or blade to get him off of it, that's not proportionate. So he's not allowed to use self-defense because of that reason. Well, he only hit him one time. If he had stabbed him multiple times, then it's like, okay, he went overkill. He didn't need to do all that to get him off of him. But to hit someone one time and unfortunately hit him in the area where he was killed, again, I'm sure he didn't know that when he was hitting him with the tool. But it's interesting that both sides agreed that, well, because the evidence shows it was only one time. So that in itself, I think the defense, if they really even dove into that detail, it's further support that this was just a defense move to get him off of him. This wasn't a move to kill him, even in the moment. I don't think Carmelo at any point before, during, or after wanted to kill this person or for this person to die. I think he was simply just defending himself. And again, this is obviously my personal opinion, but it's my personal opinion is also just based on what has been presented. Nothing to me in this case, if I thought there was some evidence of premeditation, if I thought there was some evidence of excessiveness, right, that it wasn't proportioned, then I would just simply say that. And I would be taking a side. I would say, well, this evidence supports this. But I'm not finding it. I'm not finding what the prosecution laid out for the jury for them to come up to the verdict they did. So with that being said, let's move on to the defense.
Can I?
Sure.
Make one other statement.
Sure.
Nathan came into the courtroom. You hear him on the 911 call, and he makes a statement. He says that Austin was trying to, get him out the tent. He says he either moved him or he did. It sounds like he says he did.
Who is Nathan? Always tell us who the persons are, because we're not familiar with these people. Who is Nathan?
Nathan is one of the students that was under the tent that gave a testimony.
Okay,
and
he
says, if you go back to his 911 call, I believe it's Nathan, he says Austin was trying to do a move. You heard that? A move. That's what it seems like he said on Carmelo to get him out of the tent, something like that. So again, you have different angles coming in. If you go back in time, and you could see, what different witnesses are saying in real time, according to the body cam and also the 911 calls. Also, I want to point out to you, in this particular case, the prosecution said that we would notice that the witnesses' stories would not necessarily match, and also that the timestamps wouldn't match. So after court, I was the first person to come back, and I told everybody that day, I says, listen, when you look at the body cam footage, because I be paying attention in court, we go to court together, you know what I do, right? I wrote down that the body, even though this happened on April the 2nd, 2025, that Officer Cortez body cam said it was February the 10th, 2016. So how do you get a 10-year variation at least on a body cam? What's going on here?
And again, I don't know if that was like a digital error or a misspeak. Yeah, but whatever it is, it's a clear error.
It's in the time. It's in the timestamp. You can go pull it up. It's just so
weird.
That
was clearly a digital error, and maybe not the actual video, because you're saying that was the body cam that had the wrong date.
Yes.
I think this is what sometimes fuels conspiracies, right? Even if that
Right.
was just a simple digital mistake, which clearly it wasn't, it had to be on April 2nd, right? We know that. So it was clearly a digital mistake. I think when things like that come out, it does feed the conspiracies that things have been altered, things are digital, like and all those things. Okay, so moving to the defense. So the defense had a very brief, you know, uh the defense essentially was very brief, right? There weren't a lot of witnesses, there wasn't a lot of evidence. But tell us about um the witness, which correct me if I'm wrong, was the only witness Carmelo Anthony's mom, or were there other witnesses, number one? And then number two, what pieces of evidence other than I'm assuming replaying the video did the defense have in defense of Carmelo?
Okay, so I attended from Thursday to Saturday. Monday morning, there was three witnesses that came in from the defense, and I had one of my teammates in the courtroom. As far as the impact statements, that's when the mother gave one, but that came down on Tuesday when they gave the verdict, and also the impact statements from both sides of the family.
So you're saying the impact statements were the only testimony given for the defense. There
The
wasn't
defense
like,
had six. They had six witnesses, right?
okay, so tell
Three
us
of
about
those.
who so three of them are impact statements, including the mom. Who were the other three?
No, three of the witnesses were on Saturday, were students coming in talking
Mhm.
about what happened. And
Okay.
then on Monday, there was another three witnesses that came in that the defense called. They rested their case after the third one. So basically, from what I understand, around 11:30 in the morning, they were completely done. So then
But
on
again,
Tuesday,
their witnesses were really just the three students.
three on Saturday, three on Monday. So that's six witnesses in all.
So six
They
witnesses, they
started
were all
Saturday. They
okay.
started
But
Saturday.
to be clear, six witnesses, all students. So they didn't call cops, coaches, uh, teachers. They didn't call anybody else. The defense only called the six students because perhaps they had already cross-examined the other individuals involved. You're saying they only called these six additional students.
Yes, just one
Okay.
of them was a coach. One was a coach. Two on Saturday were students, and then Monday morning they had another three students, and then they wrapped it up.
Okay, so six total, with one being a coach and the other five
Yes,
being students.
right,
Okay,
right,
so I just want to be clear for the record because you have to understand we're not there, so we don't know, and no
right.
one's putting a detailed like, okay, this is what happened online. Okay, so to be clear, six witnesses for the defense, one being a coach, the other being students, and then they closed out obviously with impact statements, including his mom's statement. Was there anything that you felt like that was really great from what your correspondent was able to cover? Did anything stand out from that one coach and the other five students that you felt like even helped Carmelo Anthony's case?
From what I understand, there was really nothing that gave him a big push. I think everything this case was shaped by the prosecution, and I saw it all. So I came to a reasonable conclusion how it would end based on what I did see and the
Mhm.
fact that there was very little objections in the case.
Interesting. So very little objections when the prosecution was making their case, and the defense, outside of these six witnesses, you're saying, even with them
Only
having this,
two. Only two.
only two objections.
That's all I saw. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So from what you saw, only two objections, and then the fact that the defense only had six witnesses, and those six witnesses didn't necessarily provide any additional support to their case. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. And I'm assuming they only played the video back. Did they show any other pieces of evidence, the defense?
No, they didn't have anything extraordinary, anything different than
Mm,
what we pretty much
was already a
saw
saw.
play out during the prosecution. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And then lastly, sometimes people say, well, Carmelo didn't take the stand. And I always say this, I've never practiced criminal law, but if I was a criminal law attorney, that's kind of criminal law 101. You're saying your clients typically don't take the stand. I mean, Diddy didn't take the stand, even though he wanted to, because it's called opening the door. So if you say anything wrong, or if you say something that the prosecution wants to run with, it allows them to open the door for all sort of other questions. And so with him, when I say him, with Carmelo, never being in trouble, never been in trouble with the law, never been, in a courtroom. I mean, he was a newbie. So to risk putting him on the stand, I think that the lawyers overall thought the risk would be greater. But let's just say he had gotten on the stand. What do you think he could have said that would have actually supported his case and may have at least swayed, at least, because all it would have taken was swaying at least one juror for him to get, a hung verdict. So what do you think he could have said to even swing one jury member to believe that this was truly self-defense, and what he did in reaction with this tool or knife or whatever you want to call it was actually in proportionate to the crime?
Okay, based on everything that I saw, I think if he had came inside the courtroom, basically stand and said, "Listen, that day I went there, we were having light banter like we typically do. I met these guys before, but they got upset with me, and I don't still don't know why they got so mad, right? I'm just giving his perspective." And then he says, when it starts getting out of control, I put my hand in the bag because a lot of them testified. Does it make it right? Not necessarily, but whatever his angle would have been on, that would have been on him. But ultimately, he could have explained that Austin was coming. And listen, I'm a small guy. He's almost 2 times my size. He has me about 90 pounds. I felt like he was going to pick me up and drop me on the metal bleachers under me, and I may not get up from that ever. So I felt the need to defend myself. I think something like
Mm,
that would have changed the game
mm.
for him.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I don't know how much of, if, we're God willing, he obviously gets a new trial. Because again, in order to get a new trial, or get a new trial or get a trial on new evidence, right? The courts actually have to agree. So assuming that they agree to either give him a new trial or give him a trial on new evidence, we're hoping more of what Carmelo could have said on this first go round would be able to be said the second time around. What were you saying,
Yes.
Mel?
I
Mhm.
want because he didn't give his side of the story, I want to give you an alternate angle that he could have
Okay.
said too that I'm not sure about.
Right.
He could have also said that I was sitting there and then Hunter punched me in my head and I
Mm-hmm.
saw Austin coming to me too. And
Mm-hmm.
because I got punched in the head, and that's why I had the black eye, I took out
Mm-hmm.
a knife and I just swung it. And I don't know who I hit. I'm just giving you that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a second variation of what he could have said because
Could have said.
we don't know
Mm.
ultimately what happened because it's so blurred under the tent. And
Right.
one key
Right.
point that I want to point out to you before we take off is
Mm.
that the video expert, when the defense asked him, "Why didn't you highlight what was happening under the tent?" He said simply, "The prosecution didn't ask me to." So they
Wow.
have they
So they didn't
highlight
decide what was happening under the tent prior to Austin coming towards Carmelo. It actually could have supported, which again, this is something else that's online that may be true or may not be true. They're saying that Carmelo was not just defending himself against Austin, that he was attacked by more than one person. And you're saying that Hunter being the closest to him, if that footage was focused on, that footage, that was zoomed in prior to Austin even coming over, it could, because we don't know, but it could, enhanced video could show that essentially Carmelo was already in fear and already in self-defense mode because he was being already hit by somebody else. And not only
right,
could his testimony say that, enhanced footage could actually support it. And so
right,
that's where new evidence would come in. That unfortunately we didn't see this go around. And what, as far as I'm concerned, kind of sealed his fate. Because that definitely would have been support that, okay, if this guy's already been beat up by another person, and then another person is coming their way to do a football move, you're like, oh my God, I'm getting ready to get clobbered. Let me just take this tool out to get them off. I'm not I'm not trying to hit you in the heart or hit you in the face. I don't know where I'm hitting. I'm pulling it out to get whoever and whomever off of me. And like you
Right.
said, it doesn't appear that the video footage or any testimony supports that anybody touched Carmelo other than Austin. There's no testimony about Hunter or anybody else
Right.
touching him, which I think is unfortunate, because this is why people are saying we don't have the whole story. We don't have the whole story. If we can't see and get testimony of what happened right before Austin came over, we can't really see that. We don't have the whole story.
Look,
And
look,
you have now a verdict based on partial information, which you say
right.
that sounds about right.
You're a lawyer, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so as a lawyer, right, and you have a case of this magnitude, there's a racial climate that's attached to it.
Absolutely.
People want to know the facts, right? So why wouldn't the prosecution highlight under the tent so everybody can see what's really happening? Why didn't the defense enhance the video so maybe somebody else punched Carmelo before Austin even got to him? Well, that's what we're not making any claims here. But
we're just saying why didn't either attorneys do this, whether it be the prosecution, but definitely the defense should have did that in defense. Yeah.
When they don't show you, it leaves you room to wonder what's being held back, right?
Yes, right? Yes.
That's reasonable.
It's reasonable doubt, which when you find a murder conviction of guilty, there can be no reasonable doubt. So to your point, the fact that they couldn't see everything and what they saw was blurry, as far as I'm concerned, should have been, even if they never showed enhanced footage. The defense at a minimum could have said, well, because we can't really see what's happening prior, because we can't see how he even extended the tool, like we can't see. So there's enough reasonable doubt in this case that you can't find for murder. Even if they just leaned into the fact that what was being presented wasn't clear, at a minimum should have been done. It doesn't seem like there was ever any real commentary on the quality of the footage being presented and that it did not show the whole thing. I feel like both sides failed to do that. And I think it's unfortunate because it definitely sealed Carmelo's fate. And kind of speaking to what you just said in terms of the racial element, one of the first things that Carmelo Anthony's parents said in their first kind of exclusive interview after this happened, I believe it was with, I believe her name is Mimi. She has her own podcast with Black Effect, the Black Effect Network. I believe it's called Front Page or something. She's the parents, the first thing they said was, you know what, we were told that we needed to just focus on white attorneys. Don't get a Black attorney, just get these white attorneys. And they said that in terms of a racial component, this is another racial component, that was the biggest mistake, that they had an all white team, that they did not defend their child enough. They didn't handle this case with the sort of care that they should have, and that they should not have listened. And they should have not gotten even if they had one white person on the team, it shouldn't have been an all white team. So it's interesting that they were told that that's the way they should do this, that maybe the judge and the jury would be more amenable maybe to white attorneys for Carmelo. But in fact, regardless of whether they're white, Black, Asian, whatever, these particular white attorneys did not do a very strong defense for Carmelo. So it's interesting that race is even playing into the sort of representation he has, which leads me to the appeals process. Now he has a team of like 4 or 5 attorneys. They are majority Black. There is, I believe, a white attorney on the team. One of the attorneys is Ben Crump firm. Her name is Attorney Brooke. She is with the Ben Crump firm. She's also his chief of staff. She's licensed in Texas. And so she, on behalf of the Ben Crump firm, will be, she's actually the only female on the appeals team. We're excited to see how they're going to kind of do what we just did in this episode. They're going to go through each piece of evidence. They're going to go through each testimony and ask these same questions. Why wasn't this presented? Why wasn't this argued? Why wasn't this objected to? Our hope is that they're going to do the same thing we just did, and then come up with, again, new pieces of evidence, because you have to have new pieces, but also they can talk about some constitutional things that happen, right? They can say, in addition to this new evidence, he didn't have a jury of his peers. None of the jury pool, as you mentioned at the top of this episode, were Black. They can also mention that in addition to he didn't have a jury of his peers, that he had insufficient counsel. I actually think he could strongly argue that he had insufficient counsel. And so these are the sort of things that you have to put into an appeal. The only thing he could do if this was not successful is serve. I believe he has to serve at least half his sentence. So, I think he has to serve at least 17 years before they would even consider a probation. That's the only other thing he could do, post conviction relief, where you're a good inmate, and because you serve a certain amount of your sentence, they'll let you go at that point. That would be his only backup to them getting him a new trial, or them having a successful appeal. And so it should be interesting to see what this new team of attorneys can bring. We also have attorney Justin, I believe his last name is Moore. I don't have his complete name in front of me, but he is an excellent criminal law attorney. I believe he also I want to say he went to Morehouse. He is known as a very young, great criminal law attorney and civil rights attorney. So he's another person on this team for the appeals. And so it should be interesting between Justin and Brooke. And there's some other high profile appellate attorneys out of Texas now on his team, what they're able to do. Before we go, was there any other thing that was potentially said in the closing arguments on either side that you think made or broke the case?
I think from a defense point of view, they really honed in on the fact that Carmelo never used a stabbing angle. He had an angle that was pretty much like this, up. And so that's why they tried to insinuate maybe he ran into the knife. That's where that whole jargon comes from. Okay. All right. So I think that was their best argument put forward to try to solidify what happened. But the prosecution, they just reiterated their basic facts.
Opening. Yeah. Okay. And then I guess the only other thing we didn't talk about was the last thing I want to close out with was the jury reaction during this whole thing. I know a lot of times with the Diddy trial, they talked about how when Diddy would make certain facial expressions, the jury would react to that. Was the jury reactive at all, or did they kind of keep their faces the same? How was Carmelo? Can you tell us more about what Carmelo looked like in the trial, and then also the jury?
I sat behind Carmelo, especially during all of the prosecution. And from what I could see from him, he was just shaking uncontrollably, like he had some health concern. Okay. Mm-hmm. He was taking notes, and he was very attentive. I think people were trying to read him, but some people are pretty stoic, right? Like myself. Anyway, as far as the jury go, when they played the 911 video, or when there was testimony from Austin's friends, the mother would be crying. She would put her head down. I mean, it's very understandable, right?
Now, which mom? Carmelo's mom or Austin's mom?
Sorry, Austin's mother was crying. Okay. And you could hear all of the sound effects that comes with crying. And sometimes it went on for the entire day. The father, I noticed he was coughing a lot. Yeah, that's the only thing I noticed about him. I didn't see him crying or anything. But when the mother was crying, especially during the 911 call, I saw maybe 3 or 4 jurors crying. And I never seen that at any case. Because, in New York, they tell you, I don't care who you are, there's no outbursts, there's no crying, you have to leave. This courtroom was not that way. They allowed it. So I'm not knocking it. I understand that that's your kid, right, but it had a big impact to me.
You feel like you had a bit, the fact that she was allowed to kind of cry uncontrollably.
Well, let me tell you,
kind of go on and not have her excuse. You feel like it impacted the jury,
right? I don't think people really knew who the mother was until she started crying. But the jurors, I'm talking about the jurors. So what happened was, I would see, how it is. You're a lawyer. They look at the attorneys when they're asking questions. Then they look at the witness to see how they answer. Back to the attorney. When the mother started crying for the rest of the trial, they would look at the mother to see if she's crying. Then look at the attorney, look at the witness, back to the mother. See what I'm saying? So she became a key.
You definitely feel like she became a focal point even for the jury's impression of this case.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
They were
Wow.
watching her like a hawk watching a chicken, you know? Yeah.
Wow. And then Carmelo's parents were at, from the days that you attended, were they there, and what were any of their reactions?
They were there, very attentive. They were sitting together, as one unit. It was a lot of them. They looked good. They looked like they had a lot of hope for him. One person I determined may have been a grandmother. Then I saw the father, the mother, clean cut people, but they were very supportive throughout the trial. Most of them sat through each day.
Got it. Yeah, his parents are young. He has really young parents. And they seem like good people, very upstanding,
Right,
citizens. So I'm so sorry this has happened to them. Like you said, there truly no real winners in this case, and I think a lot of people have said that there really are no winners in this case, because you have
right.
one child that's going to spend a significant amount of time in jail, and then you have another child that's no longer here. So, with that being said, is there anything else you want to say that perhaps um, stood out? Is there anything else you want to mention that stood out about this trial, whether it be evidence, the people watching the case, testimony, else that just really left an impression on you?
What left an impression on me is that we didn't get a clear definition of what happened under the tent because everything is so blurred out, right? So I'm a thinker, and I walked away and I said, every most of these kids mention Hunter as being the first one to say something to Carmelo. And it made me wonder, if he's sitting the closest to him, he's talking to him, and he's going back and forth with a guy that's sitting behind him. What are the chances that the first action didn't come between the two of them, right? So I was intrigued by that because if you listen to the facts of the case, Carmelo says, I told him not to put his hands on me. We readily assume that that's Austin because he's the one that was
Mhm.
stuck, right?
He could have been talking about Hunter.
Okay,
He
so
could
I'm
have
gonna
been.
leave it there, and I'll
Yeah.
let this case work its case.
Yeah, yeah. But
They
no,
got to work this case
you're
out.
pointing,
I'm gonna leave right there.
yeah, you're pointing out that, when someone says him or he, like, that's another. And again, this is why you have an appeals process. This is when you
Yeah.
do the digging. Carmelo never did take the stand, so we're not sure what he meant because he never took the stand to tell us what he meant. And so hopefully that is what we'll find out in the appeals process. If you We're going to leave at the in the bio of this video where you can find Mel on social media and on YouTube for his coverage. But also, if you want to support Carmelo Anthony, they have the Stand with Carmelo Anthony Instagram page and website. They've created a coalition with media professionals, lawyers, experts, all sorts of people that want to help support Carmelo's second phase, which is obviously hopefully a new trial or an appeal. And so, if you are interested in joining this coalition, you should go to that Stand with Carmelo Anthony Instagram page and website to figure out how you can join and support the cause. Mel, tell our audience where they can find you on Instagram and where they can find your coverage on YouTube.
Okay, primarily if you look up Watching the World 777, that's how you can find me easily. And thank you guys for all the support. I cover these cases and help you understand what's really happening in court. And usually it matches with the transcripts. So that's why in the case of Carmelo Anthony, I can't wait for the transcripts to come out so people can see that I've been on point from day one.
On
Thank you.
point from day one. Leave Mel alone. Thank you again, Mel, for, like I said, just giving us what actually happened. There's a lot of misinformation about the tool or the knife that was used, or if the video footage was edited. There's so much misinformation online. So we appreciate you coming in to do the
Can I
trial.
make a statement?
Sure, sure.
See, I won't jump on the bandwagon saying he was jumped, right? And
Okay.
I'll tell you why, right? Maybe it was just Austin, as said in court, but they led us to that conclusion because they're showing you in court, this is Austin. He hits right? So
Mhm.
there's no doubt about where they were because you can go back in the video and see where they sat, right?
Mhm.
But ultimately, I'm just as a devil's advocate,
Mhm.
what if it was Hunter that struck him first? I'm not saying that's the case. And what
Mhm.
if Austin ran up trying to break them up and he
Right.
got poked and he
So,
got
so,
poked?
so,
So
so,
we don't know. See what I'm
right. We
saying?
don't know. It's like until we have enhanced footage and or testimony that describes that, then we don't have it. And so I think to your point, it does leave it open. It does leave for reasonable doubt. It does leave for a lot of work, right, for his appeals attorney. So hopefully they're going to listen to this episode. And we thank you for joining us again. And as always, everyone, we're rooting for everyone Black. Take care, everyone.